Welcome, everyone, to Film Notes. I'm your host, Otis Moss, and we welcome you this evening. We are going to have a wonderful discussion. Tonight, we have two films that we're going to be examining. One that has been hidden for close to 100 years, and another that we have that will share and shed some light on the history of Chicago, and one individual in particular by the name of Harold Washington. Before we begin, I wanted to make sure that everyone will, one, share this information, this information on your social media, and let people know that here at Trinity United Church of Christ, we have book notes and film notes, and we are trying to educate the mind and inspire the heart so that we can continue to live out the message of Jesus Christ through whatever particular discipline or artistic gift a person has been given. And so we thank you for being with us tonight. Let's begin with a word of prayer before we begin our discussion. Lord, we thank you that you are always bringing something good in our lives, calling us to experiment with love, peace, and joy, and to create a new gumbo of possibility as we walk along the path that you have laid for us. We thank you for the filmmakers and for the subjects of these documentaries and for the work that goes forth behind the scenes. We thank you this evening as we are in the light, the post light of the Easter experience. And we just ask for your hand to be upon us that we may continue to serve you at the highest level. We thank you, we honor you, and we magnify your holy name. And we offer this prayer in the beautiful, wonderful, healing, powerful, majestic name of Jesus, who is the Christ. And the people of God who love God may say, Amen. Well, this evening, we have a very special guest with us who will be part of our discussion. None other than Associate Professor at Columbia College, Jeff Spitz. Jeff is a graduate of UCLA, the English program at UCLA, and a master's degree from the University of Chicago. He is the professor of cinema arts, TV. He also teaches screenwriting and production and storyboarding, and he himself is a filmmaker. Several of his films have been awarded and entered into film festivals across this nation. One entitled The Return of the Navajo Boy, which was a part of the Sundance Film Festival, was so powerful that it triggered an investigation on one of the Native American reservations. The film entitled the film that he has entitled Food Patriots, which is a first-person look of his family's engagement around the issue of organic food. And we're going to be looking at a portion of a film that he put together entitled The Roosevelt Experiment tonight, which shares some information about a very famous Chicagoan by the name of Harold Washington. We welcome Jeff Spitz to Film Notes this evening.
Thank you very much, Pastor Moss. It's a real thrill to be with you again as your guest. And I really appreciate your whole team getting us ready to engage people in this conversation about something good. And it's a double feature. Two something goods are going to come tonight.
There we go. Absolutely.
I'm really excited about both of them. They're old pieces of film that have enormous power. And I love the idea that you yourself are a filmmaker and producer and have written a story about your family that is extremely touching and timely, and I think probably universal, about the importance of being able to vote and what it takes to pass that dream down to your children and grandchildren in this case. So there's a whole legacy aspect to tonight that is not lost on me, and I very much appreciate you for what you were able to do with Otis's dream. And I think this is in keeping with the idea of legacy storytelling.
Well, thank you so much, Jeff. We're really excited that you're with us this evening. You're no stranger to the Trinity family. We claim you as part of the Trinity Village, and we are very appreciative of the work that you've been doing at Columbia and throughout the community. And before we have the discussion about the film, there's a few things I love to do with our guests. And the first thing is, just like from the movie Brown Sugar, where they raise the question, when did you fall in love with hip hop? My question is, when did you fall in love with film?
Wow. I think it had to be through The Wizard of Oz, and maybe even before that. But when I was a kid growing up in the San Fernando Valley in the early 60s, the only way to see that and other films would have been on television, or if your parents took you to the movies. My mom and dad both were passionate storytellers and very attuned to movies. My dad had been an actor, my grandfather a producer, and my dad loved telling stories. So bedtime stories were a big part of our life. I'd say that the movie that scared me the most, that inspired me the most, that excited me to think about it the longest, it's still very much with me. And you've done wonderful sermons referencing The Wiz and The Wizard of Oz. And that film just got under my skin at an early age. I know I was terrified of the witch. And for some strange reason, I really fell hard for the Tin Man. I wanted to be the Tin Man.
Well, one of the great films that also uses Technicolor in a unique way, the usage of color and how you use color to tell film. So I just appreciate you sharing when you fell in love with film. And you've shared something with us that has it blessed me personally, just to let the audience know. Jeff contacted myself and along with Melody Morgan not too long ago and shared this film I had not seen that was found in 2017. Is that correct?
Yes.
It had not been seen since 1898. And it was entitled Something Good, The Negro Kiss. Give us a little bit more context about this film and who was the producer and why it's important to Chicago.
Well, I want to first acknowledge that I learned about this film when I started teaching Chicago film history. I wasn't aware of it. I started to look around to see what in Chicago film history was significant. And I didn't learn about this right away. It wound up across my radar like so many things on YouTube and the internet. And when I saw it, I was just blown away. I thought, where was this made? I looked into it because I saw a little clip of about 60 seconds that was on a publication called The Root. Somebody posted it on Facebook. I watched it. Oh my God, this is the most beautiful thing. Where was it filmed? Who are these people? I was able to learn about that because of the work of another scholar, a brilliant detective named Professor Allison Field at the University of Chicago. It turns out that she also was contacted early on when this first surfaced. And this was an artifact that was in a box in an estate sale, not a film that's somehow, all intact, but a strip that needed to be carefully handled. But it lived in a box beside all these other pieces of film that were deteriorating. Why did this survive? I was fascinated by it. I learned so much from Professor Field at University of Chicago. She's the one who did the detective work to identify where that piece of film came from. She's the one who found that it was from the Selig Polyscope Company. She was able to use the sprocket holes, believe it or not, to help identify the origin of the film. So her detective work is astonishing, and she's writing a book that will come out next year. So I would just encourage people to be on the lookout for that next year by Professor Allison Field. The filmmaker, the person behind the film, was born in 1864 in Chicago. His name was William Selig. And William Selig is an interesting character. He made thousands and thousands of films, but he didn't start off as a so-called filmmaker. Why not? Because there was no such thing. He was among the very first people who looked at what Thomas Edison had invented and what the Lumiere brothers in France had invented. These machines captivated him. Now, Selig left home, Chicago, to try and become a magician in the 1880s. He went out to the West Coast and he actually performed as a magician, and he even started his own company with an African American. They had the Johnson and Selig Mastodon Minstrels. I know minstrels.
Johnson and Selig Mastodon Minstrels. Okay.
Yeah. Well, this operated for a couple of years in mining towns and logging camps because they weren't quite good enough to play San Francisco and the bigger cities of the West Coast. So they rolled along in a horse-drawn cart, true story. And eventually, Selig hired a young man who became the most famous and the first African-American superstar in comedy. And it was Burt Williams.
Wow.
Selig gave up the stage because it was too hard. You couldn't make a living doing this. He struggled.
Now, for those in the audience, I just want to, for those who may not be familiar, if you love Richard Pryor, Moms Mabley, the entire gamut of African-American comedy, Burt Williams is the progenitor. He is the primary ancestor in reference to the comedic tradition in the African-American community. That's extraordinary. That's an extraordinary piece of history.
Well, to share a little bit further, to get us to something good, something really good, you have to know that Selig came home with nothing to show for it. He was 32 years old, living with his parents, and he was determined to try and make something that could make pictures move. Edison was the one who held the patent on moving pictures in 1896, and the Lumieres had a rival camera in Paris. And the Lumiere camera could not only capture an image in the box, it could develop it in the box, and then the box could be slightly reconfigured to project the image onto a screen. The Lumieres created the world of cinema as we know it, which can film anything, anywhere, as long as there's light. Selig saw that. He knocked off the Lumiere 2-in-1 camera projector, started manufacturing these. He became a manufacturer and was selling the hardware, the camera that converts to projector. And he was also making little moving pictures. In 1896, he started. This film, Something Good, was one of many that was made in 1898. And in addition to making these little films of 20 to 30 seconds, sometimes as long as 60 seconds, he was selling black tents, the kind of opaque, thick canvas tent where you could actually invite people in. He was also selling the tickets in big rolls that you would hand to somebody who first pays for the privilege of watching a moving picture. So the tents, the tickets, the camera that turns into a projector, and of course, he had to demonstrate what it could do. So he, like many early film pioneers, would film anything that moved. For the most part, a parade or a famous person would get you an audience, a big circus parade.
Wow.
And that brings us to Something Good, because Selig made thousands of short films, most of which were lost. And the beauty of Something Good to me is that it's truly something special. It survived. Most nitrate films didn't.
Wow. Well, we have a clip of Something Good. So you set it up so very well. And after we see this clip, I want the audience to know why this image is so important, and why, when it was found, so many historians and writers were overwhelmed by what they witnessed on screen. So let's go to our clip. And also, we want to mention this is Film Notes with Otis Moss. If you would like to look at the films that we are showing, you can take a look on YouTube. We have a YouTube link for you to take a look at a longer version of the film. And we'll also have a link where you will have the opportunity to view the Roosevelt Experience. So our first film that we're going to look at will be Something Good, The Negro Kiss. So here we have that the film was found in 1898, and this close-up that they're showing here, there are two versions, correct, Jeff? A close-up version and a version that is more of a wide shot of this couple. Give us some context of the restoration process along with where the film was shown.
Well, let's start with the artifact. It was in a box, and USC's archivist, Dino Everett, got a hold of it and contacted actually Allison Field at University of Chicago to ask what she thought of it. It was something that he had to scan in order to make it move. Now you're seeing the second version of this. We posted their names in our own video promotion, but their names, of course, were never on it. And this is from a wider stepped back position, just being filmed in front of a canvas drop cloth.
Now, the two actors, the couple, now could you tell us a little bit about their history? Where did they come from?
Well, they're from Chicago, and they were quite well known. The man is Saint Subtle. The woman is Gertie Brown. And again, I have to thank Allison Field from the University of Chicago for doing this detective work. The producer, William Seelig, we've talked about, he invited Gertie Brown and Saint Subtle and their troupe, the Ragtime Four, to come to his storefront studio on Peck Court. I did a little research to find out where on earth was Peck Court. Well, in Chicago, Peck Court no longer exists. It's now called 8th Street. And ironically, that's 8th Street in Wabash, where the new Columbia College Student Center sits. Same site. So they came to a storefront, and the storefront had just a drop cloth, and they performed at least, it's likely two versions of this, one with a camera closer and the other with the camera a little further away. The restoration involved a lot of work, and this has now been placed into the National Film Registry. The Library of Congress votes every year with quite a few people on a panel which films should be saved for posterity, and this went into the National Film Registry just a couple of years ago.
Wow. Wow. This is extraordinary. Now, for those who are watching, I have to share, when I first saw this, I was deeply moved for several reasons. One, in terms of American film history, we usually begin talking about D.W. Griffith, The Birth of a Nation, which was the propaganda around the KKK, that they were the heroes of that film. And that really started the film imagery of African Americans as dangerous, as dubious, of the weaponization of Black skin. You really don't see the kind of intimacy that we witness in 1898. I have to say that again for those who are watching. 1898. We really don't witness that again, the kind of intimacy, till we get to a film called Nothing But a Man with Ivan Dixon and Abby Lincoln, which was controversial because Abby Lincoln sat on Ivan Dixon's lap, and as a husband and wife, he fed her some pie. And many people were outraged. Can this play in the South? What will happen if people in the South see a Black couple in love? So this was hidden for many years. I mean, of course, you had the Oscar Micheaux and things of that nature. But I want the audience to really understand why this is so revolutionary and so serendipitous that it was found. I believe sacred and serendipitous that this was found. Tell us more about the connection between Seelig and also African-American film in general.
Well, Seelig's catalog is something that you can look up. It's in the Rutgers University Library online. And the catalog from, let's say, 1900 and the catalog in 1903 and the catalog in 1907 were designed to sell films to exhibitors. These were not things that were sold to a consumer. The business involved selling your equipment to people who wanted to be in the business of showing films and making money. So none of this was sentimental in terms of the business. All of this was return on investment. How do we get a return on our investment? So Seelig's catalog was something that his company published. They had to write descriptions for every film, and you can read descriptions of all kinds of films. Several of them had African-American content. They are not models of civility and forward thinking. They are absolutely rooted in their time. The terminology that Saint Subtle would use for his songs and for his ragtime for performances involved words that frankly make me really uncomfortable to say. Okay. But these were the terms of the time. And if you look closely at this is Saint Subtle's own work. Okay. So you look how Saint Subtle, an African-American performer of enormous talent and charisma, born in 1870, 5 years after the Civil War. We know his parents were slaves. This is how he could make a living as a performer, using all the talents that he had to sing, to perform with other actors, to write his lyrics and songs, and to create these unique programs which played at the Chicago Opera House. People were constrained by these stereotypes. They were constrained by the conventions of the entertainment of their time, just like we're constrained right now by the conventions of our time. And our kids will look back on things that we were constrained by and say, how could they find themselves in that box?
And to see that they would utilize, if you can see right in front of you, shake your duster, the pickaninny rag, which was a common phrase and also a very negative phrase around African Americans. Speaking of someone who is a pickaninny, kind of a southern piece in terms of its development. But this is what people did in terms of trying to make a living. And I really appreciate you bringing this up. These very gifted performers forced to share the kind of entertainment that would be acceptable to a particular audience.
That's right. And those were a lot of Americans. This was a country that defined its entertainment in terms of the minstrel show from the 1830s into the new century, into the 1900s. My God, we're still dealing with blackface in this country, right? So if you have to live in a time, and we're all bound by our own times, right? You've got to resist or find a way to let your talent shine. And Saint Subtle and Gertie Brown certainly did that. And in this particular piece, we believe through Professor Field's research that they were brought to the studio to actually film the cakewalk, which is a very famous dance, African-American culture, and which many people would have known by its name. So it was called Cakewalk, and it's in their catalog. So they filmed two things that day. And it's possible that Something Good, Negro Kiss, wasn't just on a lark, but that it's very likely that they were trying to top Thomas Edison's The Kiss. Thomas Edison in 1896 made the most popular film in America. It was about 20 seconds, and it was called The Kiss. The characters who performed it, May Irwin and John Rice, were well known in America at that time, even before radio, before TV, before film. They were well known because the minstrel stage was the stage, and all the newspapers would have written about a big hit on Broadway. Well, May and John were in a big hit, and they kissed, and that was considered controversial. Wow. So their kiss is very chaste. He has a handlebar mustache. He puckers up eventually. She purses her lips, and they barely touch. It's embarrassing. When you look at it, there's no comparison. But you also realize that Selig, Gertie Brown, Saint Subtle, they weren't playing their B game. They brought their A game, and they topped Edison by far. So it's fun to see.
Beautiful to witness their movements. She's being coy, and their dress. It's obvious that they're familiar with each other. I don't know if they were boyfriend and girlfriend, husband and wife, if they had a history, but they're wonderful performers. But if you could also share the way in which film was looked at the turn of the century is not the way the film is looked at today.
This is a really important point. People say, well, film is going to mean different things to different people. Yes, of course. But let's go back before you ever had the term movie. when all you had were still pictures. And then somebody with this invention that made still pictures move. So that's where we are in the late 1800s. 1895 was the very first exhibition of moving pictures in Paris of ordinary people in the world. And the Lumiere brothers had 10 examples. Edison was already showing moving pictures, but in a kinetoscope, meaning a big wooden cabinet with a glass window on top and a coin slot. You drop in your coin for Mr. Edison, you put your eyes down on the box, look through the glass, and you might see a couple that kisses. You might see a strong man posing, making his muscles. You might see a Native American turning like a 360 so you could see the regalia. You might see two women splashing each other with water. In other words, these were known as attractions, not movies. The term movie hadn't been invented yet. They were often just referred to as moving pictures. And the invention in and of itself for more than 5 years, 1895 to well past 1900, was phenomenal enough just as it was. Show pictures that move, people will want more. It was entirely based on the idea of variety, that what we're looking at now with TikTok, and if you're sitting there right now kind of watching this with one eye and scrolling with your hand, you're in good company. That's how people were attracted to this medium and this idea in the very beginning, watching moving pictures and having an insatiable appetite for variety. No one was asking for 2 hours. No one was even asking for a movie star. The term and the idea was far away still. No one was asking for a director. That idea was far away. The people making these first films were salesmen. That's what they were doing. They were selling a new invention, a new idea for entertainment. And so if people saw this, more often than not, they saw it because it was ordered through the Sears catalog as one of several films that you could purchase through the Selig catalog or Sears. And you would get it delivered like Sears delivered everything by horse and wagon. It would be delivered. You can see on the left on the catalog, they're doing a feature about moving pictures. And you can see a projectionist standing next to a projector and people sitting on chairs. It's a small detail on the left side. So that's how you would have encountered a moving picture.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah, and I would say this about that time, that people would have been fascinated to see the beauty of that kiss after having been perhaps titillated by just the little peck on the lips that Edison had provided only 2 years earlier, which was the most popular film that year.
Now we have to take a break for a commercial real quick. You are watching Film Notes with Otis Moss III. If you would like to view the films that we are looking at, we have a link that is available so that you can take a look at Something Good, Negro Kiss, or, which we'll be looking at a little bit later, just clips from it, The Roosevelt Experiment, that was produced and directed by our guest, Jeff Spitz. Please like this on Facebook. Please share with your friends and let them know about Film Notes and Book Notes. We are simply trying to expand the mind and inspire the heart. You can follow our conversation at hashtag TrinityUCC or hashtag TrinityUCC Film Notes. For those of you who are not familiar with the hashtag, don't worry about it. But those who understand it, please connect with the hashtag so that you can follow this great conversation around film. Now, we've talked about the Something Good and Negro Kiss and how it has impacted, and there's connection in reference to African-American film. There's also a connection to this film in a unique way with Oscar Micheaux. How is Oscar Micheaux connected with Something Good?
Well, Selig built the largest moving picture studio in America on the north side of Chicago, in Western and Irving Park. It was so large that he could house dozens of wild animals in an outdoor back lot. They were in iron cages surrounded by foliage, and he would make jungle adventure films there. He would make historical reenactments of various things, the Civil War, the wars in the West with Native Americans. And Selig was hiring all kinds of talented people from Chicago theater companies to come and participate in this new medium of film. They would come and work on interior scenes like a bedroom scene or a parlor scene or well, I suppose there were very few bedroom scenes, but you would see domestic scenes in a parlor, in an entryway of a house. And you would have exterior scenes like a battlefield, or there could be some kind of a sword fight back in Roman times. All of the sets for those different periods were in the back lot outside at Western and Irving Park. He had a gigantic space. The connection to Oscar Micheaux is that when Selig built his empire, he made so much money that he was able to build the first studio in Hollywood, in LA proper, actually. And it was a permanent studio. And then he built another studio with a zoo not far from it. 700 wild animals. He was making money and operating offices in London, in Hamburg, Germany, in St. Petersburg, Russia. He was all over the world exporting his films. But when World War I came, it broke his business. He was not able to get his revenues out of Europe. And so he was in a pay-as-you-go kind of model, making money and reinvesting it in the business. Make more money, reinvest it. Well, we know that movies tend to flop, that actually it's a business model that has to be able to withstand a lot of failure. So Selig wound up having to auction everything. He had a pay-as-you-go business model that couldn't withstand World War I and the Spanish flu pandemic, which closed theaters and it destroyed a lot of businesses. His was one. So what did he do? He auctioned off everything in the Los Angeles studio and the other studios. He had to lay off all of his people. And in this same period, Oscar Micheaux, who had been a book author, who was successful writing a book about his life and embellishing, decided that he was going to make feature-length moving pictures. What happened with 1915 especially was that people realized that audiences were willing to watch 15 reels, not one reel, not two, 15 reels, 50. So bigger, more ambitious films inspired Oscar Micheaux, the book author who had also been a farmer and who was an African-American and was determined to be an independent, self-financing filmmaker, director, writer, producer. He needed a place to make his film. He went to Selig. Selig leased the space at Western and Irving Park so that Micheaux could make a film there. This was a beginning. Oscar Micheaux made film in Chicago to get going and then moved and never looked back. He had a tremendous career. But if you're interested in this name, Oscar Micheaux, I want to remind people that there is only one film of his that exists in its entirety because films deteriorated. It was shot on nitrate stock, which was flammable, flimsy. It just flat out deteriorates if it doesn't catch fire. Well, there's a film you can see on YouTube, and I highly recommend this. I show it to students, and they're all absolutely blown away by the film. It's called Within Our Gates, 1920. It's a feature film, and it stars an all African-American cast, and there is romance, and there's drama, and there is hell to pay for the reality of the Black experience that he lived and witnessed and did not want to mince words about. And since it was a silent film, he showed it all. And it's quite harsh, but it doesn't start off that way. And anyone who watches that and thinks, how did this man make a film like this? You have to know he worked extremely hard in every aspect of this art form and medium and had to hire a lot of people to work with him. So it's, again, team building. What I love about the connection between Selig and Micheaux is that Selig always worked with teams. He didn't do everything himself. When people think of filmmakers today, they tend to have such a high reverence for the names. Oh, Spielberg, and Spielberg's great. But keep in mind, like Pastor Moss said in the beginning of this program, the people behind the scenes, you don't sit through 5 minutes of credits after a
That's right.
Spielberg film,
That's right.
because after all, it's the credits? Well, every single one of those is a job. Every single one of those people is involved in an art form. It's a collaborative form. Micheaux understood it, learned by experience. Selig did too, one step at a time, trial and error, learning from experience. There are no geniuses, just people who work incredibly hard and who aren't usually recognized until something is successful.
Such a team sport and a team effort.
Yeah.
For our audience, more context of Oscar Micheaux. So he's an independent filmmaker, African American, who produced, he wrote, he directed, he owned the rights to what he was doing. Well, he inspired a particular person who's an independent filmmaker that we all know, Spike Lee. Spike Lee mentions Oscar Micheaux many times in terms of the model of 40 acres and a mule is borrowed from Oscar Micheaux. So we go from Selig to Something Good, The Negro Kiss, Oscar Micheaux, and lead you all the way to Spike Lee. So the next time you see a Spike Lee joint, make sure that you give a shout out to Oscar Micheaux. Just a wonderful, wonderful connection and reference to film and film history and African American history on that end. Again, I want to share that if you would like to view some of these films that we are talking about, many of them can be found on YouTube, as Professor Spitz mentioned. If you want to see Oscar Micheaux's film, if you would share that name again, I want to make sure I had the name correct of Oscar Micheaux's film.
Oh, Within Our Gates.
Within Our Gates on YouTube. You can find that on YouTube, Within Our Gates. Also, you can check out Something Good, The Negro Kiss. We have a link to that. Our DigiPastor is sharing that on social media platforms, and you'll also be able to find a link for the Roosevelt Experiment. We also, before we make our transition, you all did something very beautiful, and we're going to bring up the clip of when you showed the clip at the Historical Society. You brought in a musician to give a background and a composition for the images that we are seeing. If you could introduce the musician and the clip, that's going to be our transition to our next film.
Yeah, happy to. So, ragtime music is part of America's unique and original musical tradition and heritage, and it gave rise to jazz. In Chicago, there's a young man named Reginald Robinson who is synonymous with ragtime, and he is a MacArthur Genius Award winner. He went to high school in Chicago, fell in love with this type of music, ragtime, became its greatest proponent, and a wonderful treasure for our city. I reached out through friends to see if I could engage Reginald in this idea of just playing the piano with these visuals. He had not seen this, and he was touched. He said, I'm going to do this. And I said, I think the more raw and simple, the better. He said, I'll film it and I'll put it together quickly. And he made this himself and shared it with us so that we could present it at the Chicago History Museum a couple of weeks ago when we did our program, Chicago Film History, Seeing Selig.
Let's take a look at the clip with the ragtime music of Something Good, The Negro Kiss. That puts us in our second half of this conversation. We've looked at something good, but we're going to continue with something good. As I mentioned, Jeff Spitz is a filmmaker, and he created a film that blessed me when I had the opportunity to witness who was in the film, and this film entitled "The Roosevelt Experiment," which deals with the creation of what we know as Roosevelt University. Jeff, could you share with us one, how the film come about? Number one, and number two,
Mhm.
why is Roosevelt so unique as an institution in Chicago?
Well, I think the origin story of everyone is really special. And I mean, every individual. And I think this happened when I was like 24 for a reason, although it takes a lifetime to understand why you do some things and how they unfold. It's sometimes just an absolute blessing and a mystery. And this is one of those. So I was born and raised in LA, and I lived for a time with an African American family in LA while my parents were divorcing. And I always felt that I had a very close bond. And when the mayoral election in 1983 was happening in Chicago, I was kind of appalled. I thought we'd been through the civil rights era. What's going on in this city? I'd never been to Chicago. I knew nothing about Chicago. And so I started taking interest in Harold Washington from afar. When I first saw the news about him, it seemed like they were warning people about this type of dangerous politician. I got the vibe that he was something like a Don King, the old fight promoter for Muhammad Ali. I didn't know him, didn't know Chicago, but I got curious. I went to the UCLA Research Library and looked up Harold Washington, and I saw underneath his name was the name Kenneth Washington. I knew a Kenneth Washington. Now, I was doing this at the age of 24, and I was recalling the fact that my mom invited somebody to our house when I was 12. His name was Kenneth Washington. His name was in the same book, Who's Who, in Black America. I kid you not. This was at the UCLA Research Library. I called him. I tracked him down, called him, because just like Harold Washington, the person whose name was right above his, he went to a place in Chicago called Roosevelt College back in the 1940s. They both, by coincidence, were at the same college. I called, and he remembered my mom, and I told him why I was calling. He said, no one has ever asked me about my college days at Roosevelt. What a wonderful opportunity to finally talk about something that changed a lot of people's lives. And he opened up and shared that the life he led in that college was different than the life that was possible for African Americans at that time in the city of Chicago. It was different because Roosevelt had opened its doors to everyone at a time when colleges had rigid quotas, and very few colleges admitted more than a few, what you would have called back then, token Jews. If you have a quota to limit the number of Jews, imagine what the quota was like for African Americans. Both groups were subject to these quotas. He told me that he went to college with all types of people on Michigan Avenue, that Harold Washington was part of that experience, and that they were considered a communist institution because they were all able to manage going to school together on Michigan Avenue in Chicago in the 1940s. Irony of ironies, these were World War II veterans who weren't going to tolerate what they had just spent years fighting against. And so I got fired up. I'd never been to Chicago. When I decided to come to Chicago, it was with one agenda initially, and that was to find and meet Harold Washington. I knew nobody, but I also applied to graduate school at the University of Chicago to get a master's in English. And when I got accepted, I said, well, this is meant to be. I'm going to try and make a documentary with the mayor, and I'm going to try and survive a master's program in English at the U of C. Both worked out really well. And I wrote a letter to Mayor Washington, just cold, saying that I wanted to make a film about his college days. And I got a response. I couldn't believe it. The mayor of Chicago was willing to see me for an interview. And during the time between the letter and the visit, I went to Roosevelt many, many times to look at old pictures of the college. And I found a history of educators who were willing to risk their employment for a principal. They were all employees of the Central YMCA College in downtown Chicago. This was sort of a known thing that YMCA's had colleges in urban centers, and the one in Chicago charged its African American students an athletic privilege fee, as they did all students. But the African American students were not allowed to use the pool. They couldn't swim in the pool in downtown Chicago. And the trustees for that college were the captains of industry in downtown Chicago. And the president of the college was a man named Jim Sparling. And it turns out that the trustees asked the president for a head count of blacks and Jews. This was during the last year of World War II. And the president said, if the purpose of this count is to set up a quota, I won't do it. And they fired him. And he told his entire faculty that he was going to start a new college that would be open to everyone. And they agreed with that idea, and they voted to walk out without having a new college. They left Central YMCA College and followed the president to start a new college, and it was called Roosevelt. Right after the president died in 1945, they named it Roosevelt College. So this is where Harold went to college. I was able to find photos of him as a college student, and not just any student. He was the student council president. And the thing that made the project sing and that made it work so well for film is that there was an old can of film at Roosevelt that no one had looked at, apparently. And I was handed this film by somebody in the audiovisual office who said, this is an old one because it says Roosevelt College, not Roosevelt University, on the side of the film can. And I knew that it was a college in the beginning and then grew to become a university. So we put it up on a projector, and there was Harold Washington and many other students. But Harold was a young, skinny, and handsome World War II veteran. And I knew that if I could bring that to his office for my meeting and show that, it would change everything. And it absolutely did. He was so delighted to see it. More importantly, he was absolutely thrilled to be able to show everyone in the office his younger days when he was student council president, and to hear the mayor tell it, a pretty dashing young man.
Now here he is as a World War II vet. He's knocked out. He's been studying hard. I love that photo of him, by the way.
Well, he had a great personality, an incredible wit, and warmth, real human qualities. And you would see that with the mayor wherever he went to engage with people, except maybe in a city council meeting where he was tough as nails. Right? He had these qualities that were amazing. And I think being able to show him the college days rekindled a lot of those good feelings. And so I had a very different interaction with the mayor than most people in media. I wasn't working for any of the networks. I was an independent person, and I really had no background. So he gave me an incredible opportunity in Chicago. It was a blessing. And then when we completed the film, he hosted the premiere on the 5th floor of City Hall. So my parents flew in from LA. And
that's wonderful.
It was a fantastic experience.
Well, let's take a look at our first clip from the Roosevelt Experiment. You gave such a great intro, and then from there, let's have some conversation about the ideas that were put forth, not only in the film, but put forth at the institution.
A cacophony of political beliefs, strident, well-articulated positions about life and liberty. It was a real insane but interesting place. You could walk into the day room, or what they call it in those days, student union room, and you could go from one corner to another and get any kind of political discussion you wanted. You probably lose it, but you could get into it. It was just that kind of a life. We met during our college days. We met in an atmosphere of love and friendship and belonging. And so the ties were perhaps bound even tighter in that school than they would ordinarily be bound in any school, because we were living an existence which in a sense was unreal.
So that was you. You were interviewing Harold Washington at that moment. What was that like? Here you are interviewing this iconic trailblazing, charismatic politician as a young man?
Well, I have to say, when you are trying something for the first time, you're so engaged in the experience of it that you can't really say what it's like, other than I'm trying to ask the right question. I'm hoping that I get strong, emotive responses and not dry, distracted, not so concerned attitude. Well, I felt like we were in a great conversation because he was so focused on it. It was an honor to have somebody listen to you and respond from the heart. And I realized very early that film creates this unique relationship with people. It's almost like the camera becomes a magnet for deeper truth. It can be. And I felt this was what was happening. He was stepping out of the dogfight of the council wars for just enough time to share some early precious experiences that he'd been through. And it felt like he was being rejuvenated. It just seemed like I had a unique passport to take him back to a time when he wasn't fighting with Edward Doliacs and, these people in the city council who were just so awful. And frankly, the media was just as awful as it is today. And it was constantly stereotyping him and never very interested in the depth of this person or the depth of most people. You get sound bites. So I found that I was mesmerized by his conversation. I found myself really struck by what a warm-hearted, avuncular, and remarkable person he was. Not just the power figure, but person. If I could have not had a camera and gotten that kind of an experience, it would have been a miracle. But with a camera, it taught me that this is an important tool and that there can be a purpose for making films. I had assumed that the purpose of sharing the story of an integrated college in a segregated city was that we could learn from it that, hey, leave us alone. We can get along. We can go to school together. We can have great experiences. This harkens back to something good. What's so poignant about that is that's what we could have had as a country. That's what we could have had. Instead, we got these other terrible, degrading images. We could have always had Harold. Why would he have to be so special? There were many remarkable, wonderful people. Harold had to be unique because of the incredible racist structures that we've had to operate under and that we've had to battle and try and resist. So Harold did it with grace, and I could see that his was a person with open arms who would work with people. He wound up proving that time and time again by opening up his city council, by opening up his government, by opening up his cabinet to so many people, including women. In fact, he had more women than any other mayor had ever appointed. And he wanted to say, and he did say in one of the interviews, you should be able to reach into the pool of talent and pull out with a blindfold on all colors, all talents.
That's powerful. That is really powerful. And we want to give a major shout out. Owen, thank you, for your comment that your father was a part of Roosevelt and was a part of the Central YMCA.
Wow.
Ken, thank you so much for the shout out to Harold Washington. And Nadia, thank you for saying that this is an enlightening conversation. And Rosemary states, hidden greatness. Thanks for sharing and reminding us of how great an African-American mayor the city of Chicago was and should be. Taking notes. Thank you so much, Rosemary. Now, for our audience, I want to share again that the Q&A is now open. If you have a question for Professor Jeff Spitz, please place that question in the chat. Certainly want you to do that. The other thing is that I want to share some connections. Again, it's Q&A time. Some connections. First of all, Oh, here's a great question. Thank you, Donna. Did Mayor Washington mention an interest in going into politics while at Roosevelt College?
I'm really glad you asked that question, because that was the first question I asked him. When did you know? It's sort of like you asked me in the beginning, when did you fall in love with film? I asked him. And he said he knew he wanted to be a lawyer and that he wanted to be in public life in some way or another, not mayor. That would have been the farthest thing from his mind. But public life, public office, serving others somehow. And through the law, he realized that would be the path. So,
Wow. Now, from my understanding, we have a few members at Trinity who are our elders and share some history. Attorney James Montgomery had shared
wow.
with me that it was Attorney Montgomery and a variety of other people like Timmy O'Black and others who drafted Harold Washington and said, "You must run." So one of the unique connections is you have the Central YMCA, which had already been breaking down barriers in terms of making sure that anyone who comes through the doors, whether you are Black, white, whether you are a woman or a man, that you would have access to the services. Then you have the creation of Roosevelt. Roosevelt has a student council president who's Harold Washington. Harold Washington becomes mayor because of an incredible coalition. Because from my understanding, 70% of white Democrats went the other direction when Harold Washington decided that he was going to run. There was a young minister by the name of Jesse Jackson who witnessed what Harold Washington did and used the platform and the strategy of Harold Washington to run in 84 and then in 88, bringing about 3.9 million new voters to the Democratic Party. Ron Brown becomes chairman of the Democratic Party. A woman by the name of Donna Brazile becomes a strategist in the Democratic Party. Bill Clinton becomes president as a result of the new voter participation. And because of that new voter participation, and Donna Brazile working with a man by the who at the time was the vice president, Al Gore, it set the strategy and the opportunity for a person by the name of David Axelrod to then work with Barack Obama using the same strategy that Harold Washington set up in 1983. So the connections are extraordinary to me, and we really need to give honor to not only Harold Washington, but all the people who work with him, but to see the progression from when someone steps out at the YMCA, decides to build an institution at Roosevelt. That institution at Roosevelt leads to developing leadership. That leadership ends up becoming mayor. That mayor inspires someone to run for president. That run for presidency sets the stage for the first Black president in the United States of America. I'm just saying that when you step out on your dreams, a lot of things can happen in the process. Lori Baldwin had a question. How far have we come as far as diverse roles in African-American cinema? Have we made enough progress, or is there still more that needs to be made? How far have we come in terms of the images that we've witnessed on film? That question, I believe, is that coming from Lori? I don't see the name on that one, Reverend Jasmine. And then we have another question that's coming from Jordan. Oh, that's from Jordan. I'm sorry. I was looking on the side of the computer. That question is from Jordan. How far have we come? Have we made progress in terms of the imagery that we witness on film?
Sounds like a great rhetorical question. It has to be addressed internally. I think everybody would have their own measurements for this. What I love about Ava DuVernay, who is a great example of African-American storytelling and social justice fighter, she's opened doors for countless people. And Ava always said, you don't wait for somebody to open the door. Build your own house with your own damn door. You don't wait for people to invite you to the table. You make your own table and you invite people around it that you want to be there. And I would say that there's a long way to go. There's a long way to go. I don't want to be glib about it. I know that it's an enormous struggle to break in, but I also know that the progress has been remarkable, and we have to keep building on the progress. So we need those examples, and they're out there. They go back to something good. That was an act of beauty and resistance by two people who wouldn't let the constraints of their time stop them.
And here we have another great question from Oriana Armstrong. Do you think Harold Washington, that is, was fully aware of the daily politics and phenomena?
Wow, I don't think anybody was ever more aware than Harold Washington of the minutia of politics and the daily grind. But I think he was uniquely strengthened by his upbringing on the South Side and from his father, Roy Washington, to deal with these things. This is somebody who grew up in it. He was no stranger to politics. Chicago politics was in his blood.
And for those who are not from, we do have an international audience. If you want to give a 20-second primer on daily politics for those who are not from Chicago, so that they would be familiar with what Chicagoans we understand as the unique daily machine.
I don't know that I could do that justice because I'm not that focused on the old guard and the old political machine, but I do know a few things. And Boss Daley, mayor for more than 20 years, hired people he knew, people from his community mostly, and from communities that were going to not make waves, people who would pretty much go along to get along. And so Mayor Daley controlled the city with an iron grip. And he was also the head of the Democratic Party of Cook County. So here's somebody who had an iron grip on power and doled out jobs and we could call plums to his circle. And Harold and other independents, particularly Timuel Black, our beloved late ambassador of Southside history, these were independent men. They were not going to be kowtowing to Mayor Daley. They were not going to do his bidding in their neighborhoods. And so you have a very strong independent streak in Chicago, as well as many who went along with the Daley machine in order to be able to have better quality of life. So it was just sort of a given when Harold broke through that he was breaking through a giant wall, and one that most African-American people in Chicago did not dream of breaking down in their lifetimes. So it was a huge victory, and the emotion of it was overwhelming. And he won a second term, and he won over quite a few people. And as you said, Pastor Moss, it was through the coalition building of many groups and the efforts of lots of people. As a filmmaker coming from LA and not knowing a lot about this, I was educated by people who were in that coalition, like Rebecca Sive, the Playboy Foundation. Cleo Wilson became a dear friend. These people were educating me as a young person about Chicago. It's different. It ain't LA. It ain't New York. It ain't Atlanta. It is different.
We do it different here.
Yeah. Most people I know, by the way, can't believe that Obama lost a race for Congress first before he wound up running for U.S. Senator, got shellacked on the South Side by Bobby Rush. People I know have never heard of this and can't believe it when they hear that.
But nobody knew who he was. I mean, you got this. This is a city of neighborhoods. You got to be connected first, and they got to know who your people are. Who are your people? That's the first question. You have a question here from Phyllis Ray, and Phyllis would like to know the film Within Our Gates and Something Good. Is it a part of film school studies? If not, is there a push to make it so?
Wow. Well, there are many types of film school studies, and I happen to be fortunate that I'm here in Chicago and I teach something called Chicago Film History. And so I'm interested in this narrative, meaning the broader story of the evolution of the medium and the diverse voices that are part of the Chicago history. That goes all the way to Key and Peele, by the way, and the improvisation and comedy that comes out of Second City. So you're asking a very good question here. This is a big part of my idea of Chicago film history, but it may not even register on the radar of other people's film history. I have to tell you, I teach Chicago film history, and the first name that comes up is not Oscar Micheaux. Believe it or not, it's Ferris Bueller.
Really?
That's what I'm dealing with. Yeah. Well, look, people know what they know. The second biggest name is Batman, because it was filmed downtown.
Oh,
so
okay.
there's generational interests, right? And people who associate Chicago with just locations in films,
Okay.
or iconic character who is fictional but came into Chicago and interacted with, parades and the Art Institute and iconic Chicago architecture and ideas.
And lived in the suburbs, by the way.
Well, of course, yeah. The Ferris Bueller idea was the city is foreign and
Ferris
strange.
came in from the suburbs.
Yeah. So I'm glad you asked that question. I really believe that Chicago film history needs to be the history of diverse people, voices, and businesses in Chicago that have influenced other creatives and other enterprises. So Micheaux influenced everybody who followed him, including, of course, Spike Lee. Something Good, Negro Kiss is a miracle. And that's all I can say about that. The fact that it survived is just a miracle. But it goes to the point that there are parts of our history we just don't know. And when a miracle happens like this, it changes the way you see history.
Now, I have a question for, I think everybody may be interested. Is there a way to audit one of your classes? If you're interested in taking a class on Chicago film history, matter of fact, if you could just list some of the courses that you teach, and if there is a way for people who may not be enrolled in a degree program at Columbia would be able to take one of your courses.
Well, they don't allow auditing of classes, so that's not an option. But Chicago film history is something I do presentations with. And I'm glad you asked. Chicago film history, seeing ceiling, is a way into this broader discussion. As you can see, we kind of demonstrated that this evening, and there's a lot more to the evolution of the film industry that comes with a closer look at Selig and the diversity that he represented in Chicago, including Native Americans, including a lot of women. The first action cliffhanger series was something Selig made, and it starred a female action figure, a woman named Kathleen Williams, in 1914. So I would be happy to do a presentation for an organization. I would be happy to work with you, Pastor Moss, on another opportunity to share with people Chicago film history. But I can't open a Columbia classroom per se to non-students. They just don't have the mechanism for that.
All right. Well, Melanie Jackson has a question. So glad you were driven by the injustice you heard about while in LA to come to Chicago. Did Mayor Washington give you any insight on the racism he was experiencing during the time of his administration?
Yeah, but I think that he was a tougher man than people realize. He understood that and knew how to deal with it. He was somebody who could play hardball really, really well. And he'd been in it his whole life. So I understood that he was fighting a political battle on political ground with political opponents. And so did he. But he helped me understand what they were after was jobs, contracts, power, raw power. They had always had it in their hands. And here he came, elected by, popular vote. And to their way of thinking, he was not legitimate. What I learned from this was not from the mayor, it was from observation. What I learned from the mayor was that he understood all of that. He could put that into the context of a longer term movement for justice, a longer term movement which he would call fairness and reform. And he did. And in fact, when you watch the Roosevelt Experiment and it ends, keep watching, because as it turns out, there was an interview that I did with the mayor, one-on-one interview, and I had forgotten about it. And it too was sitting in a box for 30 years.
Mm.
And I've just realized that I had this and went looking for it, found it, got it digitized. It's on the end of this documentary of 22 minutes. So there's an additional like 8 minutes. We do have a clip of that. I don't think we've played it yet, but
that's a perfect segue for us to hit that clip. And before we go to the clip, I want to make sure that we get Gladys Anderson. Her question is, did Harold Washington mention to you people or a person who inspired him the most? Was there an individual that he lifted up in your conversations with him?
His father, Roy Washington. He said, my father was always willing to greet people to our home with open hands, open arms, and that people were always welcome to come and talk. And he observed that as a young person. It made a huge impression on him. He had that kind of open heart and open hands to speak with everybody.
That's beautiful. Well, let's go to our next clip. That will be our final portion for our conversation. It's been wonderful, Professor Spitz. I want to thank you for taking time to share with us what you discovered, the work that you've been doing, and just really are blessed by this.
Thank you.
The non-quota system at those days was revolutionary. It was just an accepted thing that Jews and blacks had quotas for entrance into most institutions of higher learning. It was an act of faith on the part of the entire Roosevelt University family at that time that we were bitterly opposed to it, testified against it, brooded about. We're very proud of the fact that we were being innovative and proving to the world that people can get along if you just leave them alone. That you don't have to have artificial barriers, for instance, into a school, other than the fact that you have to cut the mustard in order to make the institution work. It was that kind of a spirit that just, we were different. We were better because we didn't have hang-ups about race and sex and color. And consequently, we were the American dream, come a cropper.
Can you talk about your vision of fairness as it relates a little bit to the experiences you had back then?
I believe in fairness as a right. I think it's inherent in a democratic society that people should have the right to participate in everything that there is to participate in. For example, affirmative action is based on that concept, but affirmative action to me is a broad thing. It's not just blacks and women, it's Hispanics, it's Asians, it's whomever. It might be Poles, it might be Lithuanians or Jews or whomever at any given time are put upon. But fundamentally, fairness deals with making it possible for everyone as a right to reach his highest potential. It goes to the question of contracts, it goes to the question of hiring, it goes to the question of promotion, it goes to the question of how you deal with neighborhoods. How does it relate to Roosevelt? I suppose my feelings about this were honed in that atmosphere. It's hard to say where. Where does one get the ambition to be, for example, a TV producer in a given spot? Was it at home? Was it at school? Was it a flash of light, like a calling you got? You don't really know, but I would suspect that to a great extent my experiences at Roosevelt University have helped to hone and crystallize my ideas about government and how it should be run, and my populist ideas about how people should be treated in the process of running government. The stridency of the opposition here in Chicago, in my opinion, is based upon two different conceptions of how the world should operate and how government should function, clashing. I think the reverberations are overdrawn, but they're there. On the one hand, you have an outmoded system on its way out, but held together by, if I may say so, venal people who saw benefit from it. The inside dopesters, I call them. The old boys crowd. They want to maintain a system in which they and their cronies or they and their cohorts benefited materially. No question about that. not only benefited materially, but had all the trappings of power and all the status of power and a feel-good attitude about it. But clearly, the press of numbers, the democratic thrust of the desire to participate, feelings about the need for fairness to proliferate, these things are what motivated our movement. It wasn't just race, as people want to put it on. That wasn't a factor at all. It was just that a solid group of people, a phalanx, if you will, most of whom happened to be black, simply said, look, we can't keep this up. We're contributing and getting nothing out of it, so let's go another direction. And so these two concepts clashed. Now, we've tried to conceptualize the whole thing, not just yesterday and today, but before then. We've tried to conceptualize it around what we call a reform movement, at which fairness is a key principle of that whole movement. It's succeeding. At Roosevelt, you didn't have quite that. You had a consensus within the university speaking out as one about the desire to not only harbor a participatory democracy within the walls of the school, but that should be a way of life outside the borders of the school. And so if that was a clash, it was between what was going on in the school and the world outside, which did not necessarily agree with it. Whereas here in the city, you have the out-and-out confrontation between these competing forces, with clearly the reform movement winning out.
What kind of lessons do you think students should try and pick up from the Washington administration today?
Oh, it's a basic principle. If you really believe in impacting on the world, then your choices are limited. You have to organize and you have to propagandize. There are no other choices. You're not going to do it by yourself, and perhaps you shouldn't. And you're not going to do it unless you can schematize your thoughts and put them out to people so that they understand what you're talking about. You have to communicate, organize, propagandize. That's it. Students can have a tremendous effect on the world, and that's been proven time and time again, not just in this country, but in every country, if they decide they want to do so. They have the luxury and the leisure of not having to make a living, most of them. They're an elitist group in the sense that most of them are mastering the discipline of logical thought. They have all kinds of standards. They've got time. They've got everything that is needed to demand that they make a contribution in terms of how they feel. And it's not unusual that students historically have been a tremendous factor in moving and changing the courses of government and the course of history. So if a guy is going to school or a girl is going to school just to master an art or discipline to make a living, I think you've blown half of your purpose. Some of that time should be spent toward trying to think about a better world and how you can get along with each other. Arguments about race, sex, nationality, and ethnicity are meaningless in the final analysis. The real thrust should be how you bring all this together into a mosaic so that diversity is turned into something useful and meaningful rather than an area for clash and controversy.
Well, this has been a great conversation. We still have people that are asking questions about the film. We want to let everybody know that you can view the entire film, The Roosevelt Experiment. DigiPastor will provide the link so that you can view that film along with Something Good. That is also available on YouTube. And Professor Spitz, there was a question in reference to if there are any books that you would suggest for people who would like to learn more about the Roosevelt Experiment or about Harold Washington.
Wow. Well, let's see. There's a new documentary that is in film festivals now that is a really excellent introduction to Harold Washington and politics. It's called Punch 9, Harold Washington for Chicago. So that's one thing I'd recommend, but it is in film festivals, so it's not easily accessed. There are books about Harold, and one thing that I would recommend, it's a little old now, but it's the first thing I read, and it put me in touch with what I felt was an important part of Chicago history, and it was called An Autobiography of Black Chicago by Dempsey Travis. He was a classmate of Harold's at Roosevelt, and it's through that book that I started to appreciate what Roosevelt did that was so different. And Dempsey Travis was a very prominent South Side businessman. He was a real estate person who helped fund some of Harold's campaign work, and he was a trustee later at, I think, Roosevelt College, but he had been a student back in the day, and his point of view was fascinating to me. So I would encourage you to go back and take a look at that. After Harold Washington got elected mayor, Dempsey Travis sort of updated his book. So it's a fascinating view from the South Side on Harold. And I really liked that. I just felt that that's a unique voice in the world. So I would recommend finding The Autobiography of Black Chicago by Dempsey Travis.
All right. Well, Professor Spitz, thank you for being with us for Film Notes. I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. Sister Marva, I saw your question. We are going to have Bible study. Matter of fact, we've got Bible study running right now. I see you smiling in my sanctified imagination. Thank you for the question. We're so delighted that you are with us this evening, and we look forward to more Film Notes, book notes, or whatever notes that we can put together so that we can inspire the mind and also the heart, that we can continue to follow and serve our God at the highest level in the work that we do. And so let's just have a word of prayer, and we are going to depart from this place. Lord, we thank you. We thank you for learning more about the legacy of Harold Washington, the work of the Roosevelt University, then college, and the beautiful presentation that we witnessed in the film Something Good. You call us to find those things that are good, that have been hidden, that have been boxed up, that have been forgotten, that have been marginalized. That is our call as your people. So as we depart from this place, but never from your presence, we are thankful for the work of Selig and Micheaux. We're thankful for the work of Edward Sperling and the founders of Roosevelt College, now University. We're grateful for Harold Washington and the work of Timeo Black and others who brought together a coalition of people who were committed to making Chicago a city for all and not for some. We're grateful for the information this night, and we just ask for your blessing. And we offer this prayer in the mighty and wonderful name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Amen.